Lord of the Rings is one of the most celebrated film trilogies of all time. They've been heralded as visual effects landmarks, praised for their performances, and still hold a huge place in pop culture over 20 years after they were first released. Something I feel, however, that isn't really talked about much is the structural editing of the three films. Structural editing essentially is the organisation of the narrative, where scenes are placed, what parts are used to develop the characters, and the overall flow of the story. Though today I'll specifically be talking about the second instalment, The Two Towers. All three films do this well, and it's a big reason why the complex ideas and lore of the material was digested so easily by audiences. Just to quickly explain why I'm only looking at the second film. Firstly, Fellowship of the Ring has one big story as the focus, with every scene related to it in some way, whether it's elaborating on some ideas or exploring the characters and their dynamics. Return of the King has a similar structure to The Two Towers, with there being three main stories that are cut between as they each advance towards the ending. Since Two Towers is a bit easier to delineate and it did this first, that's why I'm using this film as my example. I also won't be talking about what changes were made in adapting the source material. There's other videos about that and I feel like we just get lost in the weeds by discussing it. Two Towers had an incredibly difficult job ahead of it. It had to advance the story from Fellowship, explore and set up more characters that would get payoffs in the next instalment, while also feeling like it had its own beginning, middle and end. To make this more palatable for an audience who might never have read the source material, the decision was made to essentially tell three stories that weave in and out. This has several advantages and disadvantages. A problem with doing this is that because of the length of the film, especially if you're watching the extended version, is that sometimes you can go long periods without seeing a particular story, which might mean you forget details of it. For example, Merry and Pippin's part in the story is trying to convince the Ents to join the war and destroy Isengard. There's bigger ideas and themes going on here, like the rejection of the idea that a conflict like this can be ignored, by Merry explaining to Pippin that by not helping now, it could eventually spread to the Shire. However, even in the theatrical cut, the importance of this can be hard to understand when it's receiving less time and attention than the A and B plots. A big advantage, it gives the story a huge sense of energy and a great pace. You're constantly moving from location to location, new characters are being introduced, and it makes rewatches much easier because you're not waiting for a boring section to finish. As I said earlier, The Two Towers tells three concurrent stories. The A plot is Frodo and Sam's journey into Mordor. Here they meet Gollum and recruit him as a guide, and a lot of time is spent exploring his character along with his relationship to Frodo. Gollum essentially works to show what's at stake for Frodo if he succumbs to the ring's influence. Along their journey they meet Faramir, who takes them towards Gileath and plans to pass the ring to his father Denethor. After showing Faramir the dangers of the ring, he allows them to leave and continue on to Mordor. This story sets up a lot that will be explored more in the sequel. Faramir and his relationship to his father, Gollum's feeling of betrayal which escalates into leading the hobbits into danger, and finally Frodo's weakening against the power of the ring, which is so important to showcase considering his actions in the sequel. This is probably the most effective of the three, since it works the best as a disconnected story, and using the hobbits as the protagonist helps to convey information in a really natural way. They don't understand the wider world, as the Shire is a very isolated place, so we learn concepts the same way that they do. The B plot is the story of Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli and their efforts to restore hope to the war-torn land of Rohan. Gandalf is revealed to be alive, but he gets more attention in the next film really. His role here is mostly just to keep the story moving forward. Theoden, the king of Rohan, is brought out from under the mind control of Saruman, and resolves to move his people into the fortress called Helm's Deep, where a huge battle is fought. Aragorn meets Éowyn, a shield maiden and Theoden's niece. She falls in love with Aragorn, which serves as a contrast to his relationship with Arwen, which is straining over her immortality. The B plot is used to showcase Aragorn's growing role into leadership, which he completes in the next film, and also the true beginning of the war for Middle-earth against Sauron. The C plot is about Merry and Pippin, and ultimately their exploration about what their roles will be in the next film. Pippin doesn't really see the bigger picture of the conflict, and thinks that his and Merry's part in the story is over. As I said earlier, this plot is mostly about exploring the idea of giving up ground to a destructive force, and what the consequences of that would ultimately be. Eventually the hobbits manage to convince Treebeard, an Ent, to involve himself and his kind in the war in order to bring down Saruman. This story is also a reflection of the wider themes of nature versus technology, which Tolkien wasn't shy of exploring. As I said earlier, the way information is conveyed is effective in the same way that Frodo and Sam's story does it, We learn ideas the same way Merry and Pippin do. So those are the three main stories in The Two Towers. It's a lot of information that I've condensed, and there are other things I haven't even mentioned. So how is this communicated to the audience? Well, another element of their construction is how these would work as individual stories if they were disconnected from one another. Let's imagine for a moment that you see Frodo and Sam's story and nothing else. You're given no other information than what's shown in their scenes, and it doesn't ever cut away from them. It still works well. You get a 3-act story where they meet Gollum, spend time with him developing characters and themes, and then the film ends with him feeling betrayed by Frodo and swearing to himself to lead them into Shelob's lair. The story is still interlaced with the first film, so it feels like a continuation by having the opening scene of Gandalf's death and Faramir later telling Frodo about Boromir's death. These ideas all weave together well to explore the One Ring's effect on the world and the characters in it. Gollum's absolutely consumed by it. Faramir wants to give it to his father, but changes his mind when he learns Boromir was driven mad by it, and Frodo is shown slowly being turned by its influence. After working this out as its own story, the next challenge is figuring out where scenes are placed in relation to the other two plots. Now obviously there's a natural progression of rising action, where the Battle of Osgiliath, Helm's Deep, and the Ents destroying Isengard all happen towards the end of the film and end concurrently, which helps give the film a sense of finality while also not finishing off the story. The Battle of Helm's Deep is a particularly good example of the effect structural editing can have on the pacing of a sequence. With Helm's Deep, we are given a chunk of the conflict and then cut away when something large has happened to indicate an escalation in the stakes. For example, this moment when Aragorn kicks a ladder down off the wall. We get a large sweeping shot which contextualises his actions in the broader battle and shows the scale of the fight. We then cut to Merry and Pippin waiting for the Ents to have their meeting where they will decide what to do. The cut between these two scenes is incredibly deliberate as it helps highlight Merry's frustration at the Ents' blasé attitude. We just got to see the death and destruction that could happen if they don't intervene, and the actual slowness of this scene helps give us some levity while also helping the audience to relate to what Merry's thinking and feeling. However, let's look at another example from earlier in the film. When Merry and Pippin are being carried by the Uruk-hai, Pippin drops the clasp from his cloak intentionally as a way for Aragorn to track them. This is used to connect the two stories together, as we then see Aragorn find it and follow their trail. We then cut to Éomer being banished from Rohan. This then cuts back to Merry and Pippin, who watch as the orcs are all brutally killed by riders on horseback. This section ends on a cliffhanger where it looks like Pippin has been trampled by a horse. We go back to Aragorn's perspective, where he meets Éomer and he explains that they killed the orcs last night, which seemingly confirms the hobbits' deaths. This is excellent editing. We see Aragorn's plot connect to Merry and Pippin through the finding of the clasp. We see Éomer banished from Rohan, who then kills the orcs holding Merry and Pippin, and then meets Aragorn the next day. The plots are interwoven beautifully, and it gives you a chance to piece information together yourself. Who Éomer is and his role in Rohan is explained purely through the cutting together of these scenes. You could have worked this out without any dialogue being spoken. It also allows Aragorn's entrance into the Rohan story a kind of cover, because this information is secondary to their main goal of finding the hobbits. It makes this beat feel less artificial, even though it's a huge coincidence that these characters happen to meet. By also leaving Pippin's fate a cliffhanger, it provides a sense of energy that carries the story into Aragorn discovering what actually happened to him. This scene is also another great example of scene placement. Enough time has passed since we saw that cliffhanger, so questions are being formed. The intercutting of Aragorn following their trail with us, seeing the hobbits escape, helps keep the tension up as well as keeping the stories linked. We then get 2 long scenes with Sam and Frodo, which helps us re-engage with their story since we haven't seen them since the beginning. This gap again gives the story a chance to breathe and naturally allows an audience to build up some questions in their mind. What is Fangorn Forest and why is it so dangerous? Who is the White Wizard Éomer told them about? Speaking of the White Wizard, Gandalf being revealed as alive here was set up nicely by the opening scene showing some of his battle with the Balrog, which we get to see the rest of it in his explanation to Aragorn and also by Pippin and Merry meeting him first. So what is the cumulative effect of editing like this? Ultimately, I think it makes the emotional payoff of Sam's speech at the end hit way harder. His monologue is about the power of hope and the role that acts of good have in turning the tide against evil. It's not complex stuff, but it works so incredibly well because we've seen the other perspectives peppered in which confirm what he's saying. I'm not saying that removed from this structure these emotional beats don't work, because the score and performances are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but I think we can all agree that the structural editing of the film has only made the narrative and themes stronger. In conclusion, structural editing is a lot like other ancillary elements of filmmaking, such as sound mixing. If it works well, you don't really tend to notice it, but when it's done badly, it can lead to some films feeling a bit off or like it's missing something. Lord of the Rings is great for a lot of reasons, but hopefully I've highlighted why this sort of work done on the story can be essential to creating something iconic.